So next, let's dive a little deeper into the ecological effects of light pollution. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Travis Longcore. Dr. Longcore is an associate adjunct professor at the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, the science director of the Urban Wildlands Group, an LA-based conservation nonprofit, and an independent ecological design and environmental policy consultant. His research is focused on nature and cities. And many of you, I'm sure, may know him because his landmark article in 2004 titled Ecological Light Pollution and his 2006 co-edited book, Ecological Consequences of Artificial Night Lighting, have really come to define this area of study in urban ecology. Earlier this year, Dr. Longcore was awarded the Galileo Award by the International Dark Sky Association. Welcome, Dr. Longcore, and go ahead and share your screen, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, John, for the lead-in presentation. And we'll go a little bit in more detail here now with the ecological effects of light pollution. And so we got started on this really about, well, more than 20 years ago. The article there on the left was from 2002 when we organized the first conference, international conference on the effects of light at night on ecosystems. My now wife, Catherine Rich, and I did that. And then around the same time, the National Park Service was also gearing up its Night Skies Natural Sounds Division and was doing these incredible mosaics of measuring light pollution from the national parks. That was some coverage there from 2004. We, just by way of the background here, we did do that article in 2004, and the edited book that came out in 2006 now, really trying to establish this sort of leg of the light pollution stool, as it were. And it really came out of some questions from colleagues at the International Dark Sky Association, where they were, back in those days, having a hard time getting people to understand that light pollution wasn't just about astronomers and astronomical observation, even though it is, or just about sort of cultural loss of night and human connection to the sky, although it is, or about human health and human circadian rhythms, although it is, but that it also was about wildlife. And so this work that we started then was really in response to those questions of, can we get something together to establish that this too is an important part of the story? And really what it showed at that time and has in the 20 years since is that, one, there were definitely precursors back out there that we knew about already that just needed to be articulated. And also the amount of new knowledge that we've added in the 20 years since has really been quite incredible, leading us to better advice here about how we mitigate, how we avoid, how we calculate the impacts of light at night. But when it comes right down to it, you know, it's about losing this. This is a photograph one of my students took using a special camera on the north rim of the Grand Canyon. You can see a tiny bit of light there on the horizon. You can see the glow of a campfire, but really that's pretty much a natural dark sky. And just for reference, that's about a 2-minute exposure in a camera with a special hemispherical lens on it. So we're seeing the entire hemisphere. If you move out to the outskirts of Los Angeles, it looks more like this. And that's about a 30-second exposure. You can see the Milky Way through there, but the lights that you see, it's really starting to wash that out considerably all around the horizon. That's Los Angeles and Ventura County and whatnot. And then if you go to the mountains that bisect Los Angeles itself and take about a 5-second exposure on a cloudy night, it looks like this, which is, when we do the calculations, even brighter, considerably brighter than the light that's given by the full moon. And so we have now places that are basically robbed perpetually of the lunar cycles and all the things that go along with lunar cycles. And if you can imagine you're a nocturnal creature that's used to and evolved in the condition of that first photograph, and you're living in an environment like this, is going to pose some challenges, which is what I'm going to talk to about here just for a little bit. So there are many ways that we can divide up the impacts of light pollution on wild ecosystems and wildlife. This happens to be one. I've got kind of 4 different categories, bins of things that I talk about. One is attraction and disorientation. And these are the ones that we've kind of known the longest. The phrase "like a moth to a flame" has been around for a long time, as you might imagine. Being able to scare even predators away from campfire goes back to prehistoric human societies. So that's attraction and disorientation. Associated with that, and repulsion as well. Associated with that might be something like fragmentation or loss of connectivity, where lights at night create a barrier in the landscape to nocturnal species that isn't obvious if we look during the daytime, or the road doesn't look as much of a barrier, but once you realize that it's a lit environment, that has additional consequences. And then the upper right, we have interference with pollination, foraging, and all manner of ecological interactions. So all these little things that go on between species. Is it safe to go out and forage, or is a predator going to eat me? Decisions that get made by prey species, access to and interaction between insects and plants in terms of pollination. All these interactions are much more subtle than the things that leave dead bodies on the ground, which we have. Those tend to be attraction and disorientation, but they're no less significant because they can really structure species communities and distributions, as we've learned in the last 20 years or so. And then finally, we have disruption of circadian rhythms, the daily rhythms, the physiological responses of organisms that go on that you don't necessarily see just looking from the outside, but you have to measure in other ways, have other manifestations like the time that an animal will breed, when a bird is laying its eggs, when it migrates, the direction that it might go. All of these may be tied to lunar and seasonal rhythms or daily rhythms. So all these sort of rhythm things that then have spillover consequences. So I'll try to give you some examples of each of these and then talk about how we mitigate them. So attraction and disorientation, this is a picture painted of the Eddystone Light in 1912, showing this massive attraction of migratory birds to the light. And these birds, often do collide then with structures, can die. And we see this across the world today with bright lights, but it goes back. We've known it for a very long time that things get attracted, especially migratory birds, insects get attracted to these lights. It looks maybe a little bit like this. This is a video, if it will run, from Chicago from about the time we got started on this. And you see the little sparks of light above the lights on this building. Those are birds. The birds during migration that have been attracted off course and are then circling this building and being caught by, I'm going to go with, it was a actual video recorder back in 2002. And then the consequence of that that we'll hear more about from Chris and Mary as we move along is birds that are attracted to lights end up encountering things like windows, colliding with them and dying. And so we have many, many records of this happening, both in cities, but also at tall structures like communication towers, where the birds attracted to those circle around them and then run into the miles, literally miles of cables that hold up our extremely tall communication towers and can result in massive, mortality events, 400 birds in a night. These are the kinds of things that happen. And so we're going on here, just a little illustration of going and finding these birds grounded on the city surface after the light attraction event. This happens for seabirds as well. This video from my colleague Aaron Rodriguez, where they are using GPS trackers on fledgling shearwaters that are coming out of a nest site. So the nest site is in the upper right in both images. And the first couple of birds that come out make it to the ocean. That's where they need to go. But the rest of them get attracted to the lights that you can see in the video on the left. First two, there they go out to sea. That one hits the lights and then, still back on the lights. The fourth one's on the lights. And this is a problem because they get grounded. They're subject to predation by predators, and they also have a hard time getting aloft. So you actually have to collect them up, get them back, calm down a bit, and they actually release them by tossing them off a cliff so that they can get some lift underneath them and get out to the ocean where they need to go. So this is something that's going on all the time during breeding seasons for seabirds. We also have sea turtles that are attracted by lights. And this is just some recent photographs that were sent to me, just showing how kind of sad this really is. This is a light at a resort in Central America. Those sea turtle hatchlings hatched on the beach. They normally would go away from the darkest horizon. But in this instance, there's a light, and so that becomes the thing that they get attracted to, and they've come up onto this patio, and all these little hatchlings are just sitting there underneath the light. Just they don't know where to go, and they can't, because this is an completely unnatural phenomenon for them. And of course, this results in large levels of mortality. People do try to rehab and get these animals back out into the ocean, but the real solution is to deal with the lighting. We have attraction also of insects. This is in the center. There is a picture from the Peruvian Amazon from a study that we were doing with the Smithsonian. These are lights that have been installed at some hydrocarbon facilities that were going to go in, and they were going to be lit. And the only question left was, what color do we do the lighting? So there's an experiment there on the right-hand side. The fellows there are standing around an experimental light that has a yellow filter on it to try to reduce the attraction of the insects. It actually does work, but of course, the optimal solution here is don't light up the Amazon rainforest. But if you have to, for whatever reason, we can reduce that attraction somewhat by using different colors. But this is what it looks like when you, in the center there, when you introduce lights to a naive habitat, a biodiverse naive habitat that's never had lights in it before. You get quite a profusion of organisms. And so this is then attraction to lights for insects does result in death. This is just a video from my colleague Gerhard Eisenbeis showing a single light illuminating a sculpture at a location where he works in Germany. And every one of these is hot on top of that lens there, and those insects get attracted to it, and then they get fried. So on it comes, and that's about how long it takes, and then you've just killed another insect. So these are the, as I put it, the ones that leave dead bodies on the ground, and then they have consequences, right? There are consequences to this. So pollination is oftentimes nocturnal. We usually think about daytime pollination, but moths are especially adapted and co-evolved to many night blooming flowers in order to pollinate them. And we have incredible research now coming out of the UK and Switzerland, really demonstrating that light at night reduces nocturnal pollination services. And it does it to such a degree that it actually changes the daytime pollinator community, because those nighttime plants that get pollinated at the night also have sometimes flowers that are open during the day. And with the reduction in nighttime pollination, you get reduction in overall flower cover and reduction in daytime pollinators as well. Absolutely incredible study that was done by observing thousands and thousands of nighttime and daytime flower insect interactions, and then experimentally lighting up a meadow with street lights and demonstrating these impacts. Rather incredible work that people have done to demonstrate this, and now we know. Right. Another ecological interaction is a study that my colleagues and I did here in Southern California, published quite recently, We looked at the distribution of western snowy plovers, which do nest and roost on the coast of California, including up in the Bay Area and beyond. Many of them come down here to Los Angeles to roost. So we were looking at roosting sites for snowy plovers in the wintertime. And then also the spawning sites for California grunion, which is this fish that during the full moon, so very bright, naturally bright conditions, and the new moon will spawn on the beach. And both of these are susceptible to predators because they're kind of both tasty little morsels, if you will. And so the question that we asked, using a bunch of community science data, people who've gone out and collected information about the distribution of these roosts, the distribution of the grunion runs, and then we created a light exposure model that involved taking light measurements on the beach at 515 locations inside that image there, which is Ventura, Los Angeles, and Orange counties. And then modeling that outward, figuring out the brightness along the beach, other elements of the habitat that were important to these two species, and then figuring out if we could explain what was explaining the distribution of the roost and distribution of these grunion runs. And we found two different results for the two things. We found that for the plovers, we were more likely to see it where it was darker, but after you get past about 0.05 lux, and that's about half the brightness of a full moon. So once the light pollution itself was more than about half the brightness of a full moon, we had this really precipitous decline and much less distribution of the plovers in that area. So it's our theory there is that it is using darkness as a refuge from predators, and this is being driven by interspecies relationships where it's afraid of being eaten basically if the lights are too bright at night. The grunion story is a little bit different because I already said that it will spawn both at the full moon and the new moon. And so we find a maximum there at about a 1 lux. So it's which is about the brightness of a full moon, but this is 1 lux of light pollution. And it may be that the grunion spawning is being guided a little bit by the lights on the beach. These fish are a little bit attracted to light as juveniles, and that may hold over into the adults. But once we get past about 1/10 of a lux, so the light of a full moon, our probabilities start going downward and reducing it. So very interesting that we found different results for the two that have these two different ecologies, and also starts to suggest some thresholds that we wouldn't want to go beyond in places like sensitive habitats like the beach, where we've got species that are either threatened or endangered or regulated. Then we have the question of connectivity. This is P22, which is our resident mountain lion in the hills of Los Angeles in Griffith Park. And we think a little bit about what the barriers are to a mountain lion in these urban situations. And one of the barriers is, yes, of course, the roads, and the roads are what are killing them. But it turns out, if you look in the literature, that juvenile mountain lions try to avoid, unless they have to, they try to avoid areas that are brighter. There's research that goes back to the early 90s in Orange County, and we're trying to do some studies now to sort of confirm how this works, how space use of wildlands is influenced by light, and how light may be acting as a fragmentation. Just incidentally, this image here is the 101 freeway in Agora Hills, California, and this is the break between the Santa Monica Mountains, which are those mountains I'm looking southward to right now, and the Simi Hills and the rest of the California wildlands, which are behind this picture. And in fact, there will be constructed a wildlife overpass right over the freeway where you see it here. So there will become a dark path that goes through this environment. And I'm working with the designers of it to ensure that we create a path that minimizes the light spill onto it in every way possible, so that these animals find and perceive a safe pathway over the freeway instead of occasionally in desperation trying to run across it. but using darkness as the guide there as much as possible. This fragmentation happens in aquatic environments as well. This is the Sundial Bridge in Reading, which is just horribly, horribly lit with about the worst way you could light it in terms of maintaining the migratory connectivity for the fish that go up and down this river. And so we have evidence, and there's a new paper about this I've got to read, just came out and I haven't had a chance to go through it yet about this particular bridge. But in general, lights will attract predators, aquatic predators who then eat fish who are migrating in or out, or they will attract fish on their migratory pathway and not let them pass one way or another. Physiological responses then, this is a field of winter soybeans, and they will set seed and turn brown once the days get short enough for them to detect that winter is coming. What you see here in these circles, these sort of half circles of green around what is a street light, is the street light's bright enough so that the soybeans don't detect that the day is getting shorter, and consequently they don't set seed. And so that's really, really a visible thing. You can also see the shadow of the street light itself runs a line right through that soybean field where those were like, okay, it's dark enough here and we think that winter is coming. But there's dozens of examples like this in the natural world where there are cues, highly reliable cues over millions of years about seasons changing, day changing, lunar changes and whatnot that are just simply erased by light at night. And just to give another one that's a really cool example is reindeer. Reindeer change the color of their eyes based on the time of the year. In the summertime, their eyes are yellow, and in the wintertime, their eyes are blue. Yellow, kind of like sunglasses, as it were, inside. And this is what it looks like. Those are two reindeer eyes, came out of reindeer that were killed at different times of the year. The left killed during the winter, the right killed during the summer. And light pollution can interfere with this. There is an example, they found a green reindeer eye. Well, what was that? It was reindeer that was kept in a pen where there were some lights that were over the hill from it. And so it was too bright for them to fully adapt to their winter eyes, as it were, and fully pick up the subtleties of the light that's available in the Arctic night. So all these things can be dealt with a little bit if we think about the different light perceiving systems across organisms. Humans see, we're used to seeing what we see, right? We've got three different photoreceptors. We see yellow all the way through to blue and violet. Well, deer don't. They don't see orange and red. And so there's a bunch of mismatches out there between human vision and wildlife vision. I'll show this to you really in a couple of examples. Some species see over into the ultraviolet, so that's shorter wavelengths past violet and purple that we don't see, but that others do, because there's a lot of ultraviolet in sunlight. And so many insects are very attracted to ultraviolet light that they're seeing, but we're not. So the peak of our vision is sort of in the middle of this graph, and the peak sensitivity of insect vision on average is much shorter wavelengths. I've taken and overlaid all of the visual responses of all the different organisms that I could find in the literature for the past, whatever, it's 70 years, and summarize them here. And what you'll see is human vision, daytime vision, peaks a little bit to the right of this graph here. This shows the peak of the average animal in the world has a peak right here in the green, and a lot of organisms have a peak over here in the ultraviolet, where humans aren't seeing anything at all. But human vision, it turns out, our peak sensitivity, where this arrow is at the top, is a bit to the longer wavelengths. And so what that suggests, and we can look at this by different group, we can look at birds and insects and spiders and whatnot, and see the different shapes of these responses across species to different organisms. But the summary of all of this is the only place where we can try to let light be visible to humans so that we can have the safety that we want to have at night is to use the longer wavelengths and not the shorter wavelengths, because of these other species, including other mammals, other insects, that have much higher sensitivity to the shorter wavelengths than humans do. And that then translates into summary metrics that we have for lighting. There's a thing called correlated color temperature for lighting, which expresses how much yellow or blue is in it. Blue are short wavelengths, yellow are long wavelengths. Low color temperatures look yellow, like this thing I've got here on the bottom. Very high color temperatures look blue. And I've used some of these animal responses to create a wildlife sensitivity index and shown that the higher your color temperature is, the greater the impact is going to be on wildlife. This will be updated as we learn more and summarize more. But when Dr. Barentine talks about using the right color, overall, it means going to less blue light and more yellows and reds and oranges. That doesn't solve all of our issues with birds, because birds tend to have a very broad visual sensitivity. And so this technique doesn't work as well with birds, but it certainly works really well, or better, I would say, with insects that birds count on. So if we want to think ecosystem wide, we do want to think about this color temperature question. The exception to that are species that communicate using bioluminescence, like fireflies, because the yellows that we're talking about tend to intersect like with the yellow of a firefly at dusk. And so there are exceptions to this rule. And in those instances, you got to just avoid the light. So finally, to minimize the adverse impacts of light, put it only where you need it, turn it off when you don't need it, only use as much as you need, direct it where it needs to go, and then use the lowest possible correlated color temperature or more yellow light than blue light for the goal of the lighting. But together, all 5 of these things can all be implemented and still have safety and comfort and really appealing urban landscapes. It's just good lighting design. So with that, I'll stop and we'll pick anything up in the questions as we move along. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Longcore, for that discussion of the adverse effects of light pollution on ecosystems and wildlife. That photo that you showed of the sea turtle hatchlings, just heartbreaking. And examples like that are, I think, really why this problem is so important, and I'm sure why many of us are here at the symposium today. And the 5 strategies that you mentioned at the end, they make a lot of sense, and I hope we can all keep them in mind when we think about lighting in our own homes and communities.